Welcome to another episode of the Zealous Podcast, the show that's all about the pros behind the pros. And this week, I get to sit and chat with Dr. Jena Gatses. Jena has been with NASCAR, but is now down in Santa Monica, California, setting up shop. She's a physical therapist, strength coach, and a whole lot more. So I hope you enjoy our conversation because you know I do. How did it go for Perform Better, your meeting of the minds?
It went really well. It was interesting because, people are getting antsy with having to see presenter after presenter. I missed the in-person stuff. So it was more interactive. I felt like we got to all talk and kind of comment to each other's responses. And it was interesting.
Yeah, it's nice to know that there is going to be live events next year.
I know. The end of this year, too.
Yeah. Are you going to head back December and
Providence?
Nice.
Yeah, I would love to. So we'll see what's going on. I feel like you can't say anything in the future because you never know.
True. Well, and then you spoke on recovery and regeneration.
Yep.
And so were there any moments? I mean, looking back, you've got four people chatting up a storm, everyone with their own opinion here and there, but were you all kind of resonating the same thing, or was there a lot of different opinions?
No, I feel like everyone, and in which it should. I feel like, in the health and wellness and fitness space, like we're all in this together, and there's just levels of understanding that need to be met, but it's all toward the same goal of making people better, trying to get them more functional and more independent so they don't have to rely on pills and surgery or just waiting to have injuries. So it was interesting to see, like, we all agreed on a lot of things and just, expanded on different things and just focused as far as like within our treatments, just on different areas of recovery. But it was good to see that recovery is all about homeostasis, and we were definitely all in agreement to that, not just like jumping on the new fad and trend, actually understanding what recovery is and if you're recovering individually for your body. Sure.
Now you've got your Doctor of Physical Therapy, you're also CSCS, you've got a few other letters after your name. But I'm curious, I did a series with my podcast here, and it was the Women of the NFL, where I was talking with a whole bunch of female coaches that are with NFL teams. And you yourself, you've been with NASCAR, which I think is very similar because it's not necessarily a very heavily populated sport for women. So what the heck? How did that get going?
It's so interesting. And actually, I didn't know this going into it, but a lot of the ex-NFL players come into NASCAR, or if you can't make it in the NFL, they come to NASCAR because the pit crew, everyone always forgets about the pit crew. It's not just the drivers. So the pit crew, they have to be quick, they have to be agile, they, good with their hands. So it's interesting to see skills transfer over. And it was a lot, but I'm 100% Greek. So like I have a huge family, and I'm the only girl on my mom's whole side of the family. So I grew up, hunting, fishing, just being with the boys. Like that was my thing. So it was crazy though. I remember I said this in Perform Better too, where you got to set that stage and that standard. So I work out very hard. I can lift heavy weight. So the first day when we were doing strength and conditioning, and I programmed everything and we did the physical therapy. But when I was teaching them the workouts, I'm like, this is the lift you're going to do. And the one guy was like, why should I do that? Why don't you do that? And I'm like, well, I don't lift bitch weight. So I'll go get my weight and then I'll show you. And like, I lift heavy because when you do things the right way and you recover fully and you're working your coordination and your strength and power fibers, you can really accomplish so much. And it's fun to build on that. And so they shut up real quick. So just understanding, and I talked about this when I was speaking for Perform Better too, like understanding where you are and where you came from and your knowledge and like our history in what we do, and not letting people intimidate us just because they are professional athletes, and just like standing your ground because you know your shit and you're like, all right, I'm gonna help you. So the more you can get your ego out of the way, the more we can move forward. But it was archaic, they didn't have a recovery, center or anything. I put in subfloor, we put in a whole facility. So it was interesting, but they really trusted me with a lot. And I got to expand not only their minds, but their facility as well. And in NASCAR, I mean, these guys are like, some of them are like, I don't stretch, I just dip. I remember Joe Gibbs' son actually said that to me. He's like, I dip, that's my recovery. And I was like, I can't, like, please stop. So you have to like know how to navigate and also know how to stand your ground, and not let them walk all over you, because they will.
Yeah. I don't. Speaking of standing your ground, I don't stand very high off the ground for that matter. I mean, I think I'm part Hobbit is really what it comes down to. But I was asked to go over and help with one of the college football teams nearby several years back to teach them some Olympic lifts and some other strength conditioning. And these guys, these are big mokes that are standing like 6 something. They're towering over me. And it's like almost like the punter came in and was going to try and coach the linemen. But
Yep,
they were
yep.
like, yeah, right. All right. And they're struggling with clean and jerking like 185 or 225. And I just said, well, you got to do this and that. And I'm like, you know what? Better yet, here, I'll chalk up my hands. I'll get over there. And I threw that thing up like it was just putty.
And they're just like how
Instant. You get instant respect. I know
instant credibility.
Exactly. So
It's
I understand
different with
where you were.
athletes. Yeah, it's so different with athletes. And like they still go with it and they'll be like, well, why should I do this? Because everything's a challenge. They just don't want to do it. So they want to come at you to make sure you know what you're talking about. And so why should I do this? And why should I do that? And I'm like, next time I won't even go to school. Like, I spent 7 years in school. Next time I'll just give you my tuition money and then I'll go to school at your house because you're so smart and you know everything. And he's like, you're such a bitch. I'm like, go do what I said. He's like, all right, I'm sorry. So it's like, not always having like this, like, you can't talk to me this way or that way. Like they used to draw things on me on Snapchat and send them all to each other. And like, I'm like, you son of a bitches. But you have to know when to have fun and joke around and still like be a team, but then also when to stand your ground. And they'll trust that process. And it's fun to watch. And they do whatever you say because they see and they feel themselves getting better. They perform better. Their numbers show it. So it's in the results.
Wow. I don't want to hang on the NASCAR thing too long, but I am curious in terms of program design. I mean, I've had a couple people come in here that were part of pit crews, but it was for like the streetcar, the National Streetcar Association, but not NASCAR. What is it with programming NASCAR that's a little bit different than other sports?
So, I mean, motocross too, we had a motocross division too. So those guys were out like, shattering bones on the weekends. And then I'd be like, okay, let's fix this. So, that's what I like about what I do with any sport. I work with all different sports across the world, basically. And with a sport, I'm thinking about what is the human structure doing within that sport? Is it explosive? Is it isometric? Is this something where they need muscular endurance or do they need power? And so you're basically taking, and that's each position. So there's a gas guy that holds a 100-pound gas can. And then there's a guy with a gun that runs around, changes the tires, and they do that all within 10 seconds and under. So you think about like, where can I get an advantage there? And we work those mechanics and basically the way the brain works, it transfers over to their sport and their skill. I don't change them when they're doing things. I train their brain and I put them in the positions that they're in while they're performing. So each guy is different. And with NASCAR, we built our own cars. So we had the welding and everything in the shop. So I'd go down, we had a Kaiser unit, and I'd go down and be like, hey, can you make me this like handle thing? Or like, like we made something that looked like a gun so that we can challenge them and put it on the cable cross machine. I mean, what that's like, just like to be a kid in a candy store, like making little toys and like having them train on them. Like it was so interesting, but each guy was different depending on their skill and what they're doing within the sport. And then also just their lifestyle, if they're getting recovery, if their relationship's okay, or they're constantly stressed out. We're the longest season in pro sports. We had our own planes. They're flying every weekend and then they're drinking. And I'm like, let's try to control as many variables as we can so we can control the damage of your bodies, So I try to have them wear compression and they were doing the Normatec every day. So it was fun. And we really changed the whole culture and understanding. They're doing yoga. I put little lights, like candle lights everywhere. It was great.
So I can imagine that the common injury sites with NASCAR pit crew is number one is going to be lower back. Because they don't stretch, they're not flexible. They're lifting all awkward places, and probably shoulders, maybe neck. What's the high common sites?
Yes, and a lot of low back SI because they jump off that wall. So they all have fire suits on because you can just get caught on fire, and then it's just ridiculous. Sometimes the car would drive by and they would run over a lug nut and it would shatter someone's eye socket. And I'm like, we're going to the hospital. Let's go. So every day is different. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. But I'm like, what was the original question? I completely blanked.
Oh, just common injury sites.
Oh, so the SI joint stepping off the wall, just the unevenness with their SI, the back, like you said, knee stuff, but then the common things like everyday occurrences where like, you know, a shattered orbital a socket, like how do you prepare for that? So you have to know like the chronic stuff and then the acute things that could happen. Some guys would get hit by a car, some guys would get lit on fire. So we have to control all variables. There as many as we can. And that's where core training and stability training and doing balance and motor control work can help. So if they do get injured, they're not going to get injured as much because their body's more connected to their muscles.
Okay, so now you're out of NASCAR. Do you still relate to NASCAR, or are you out of it?
Yeah, I work with a lot of the drivers and the pick guys individually. We do a lot of FaceTime stuff. Plus, when I'm doing conventions and things and speaking things, they're sometimes in the same city. So I'll always see them. I'm like, they're like, it was like I had 70 sons. They were the jackman forgot the jack. I'm like, don't worry, I got it. You know, I'm like, how do you forget the jack? And so it was fun. You know, it was the team morale was high. They knew I cared about them, and they knew the faculty and faculty, all the staff cared about them. And it was just a team driven sport a lot of the time that I was there, you know, so it was great.
So you're blending strength conditioning with your background in education and physical therapy. And I see that happening more and more. It seems to be the direction that a lot of PTs are heading in. Do you find that that's true, and how has it worked for you?
That's all I live by. So my whole motto with everything that I do, I've studied so much from massage to physical therapy to exercise science, kinesiology, whatever. I volunteer and do things for free just so I can see and be exposed to more, because I want to know about the body. Because I tell people, like, I don't want you to need me. I want you to understand how you can impact your health and you can relate. So many of my people are like, wow, I saw myself sitting like a slob like this during work for like 4 hours. I didn't even realize, but now I made sure like I switched positions and, you know, so helping people just, you know, be independent with their lives and, you know, word of mouth. I'm referral based and like, I'm turning people away. I'm one person. So you'll always get money when you are good at what you do, or when you help people and you have the motives of helping people with, you know, be number one. It's when people start to have business as number one, where you don't really get far. So if you want people to keep coming back, they'll come back because they know you can help them. So you don't ever have to just have someone come to you just because you want to make money, and they'll tell all their friends about you. And it's all about like making people better to the point where they're even more elite than they came in if they had an injury.
So one of the ways of reducing the likelihood of injury, I don't think we can reduce the chance. I mean, everyone's got a chance of being injured, but the likelihood of all things kind of being good versus being bad is recovery and regeneration of the body, and not continually pounding it and pounding it and pounding it and just hoping that it heals properly to make a stronger body. So what are the key components that you find when it comes to recovery and regen?
So the basics are the sleep, the nutrition, the hydration, the exercise, making sure you're actually active. I educate people on that, number one. That's everything. Your breathing. Are they even breathing correctly? So your internal environment is going to be different based on the mechanics of your breathing, you know, and then the way you lift. If you're not breathing correctly, you're not stimulating your inner core. So then you're loading that. And so you're just causing inflammation internally for no reason. So just trying to let people understand the basics first, and then motor control. Everything in your body, like basically I've been doing research like crazy, and I always do, and I stay up to date because we have to. Everything's always changing. And there was this research article on these submax and max effort exercises, and they did EMG studies. We only activate 35 to 65% at max failure. And it's like maximal exercise, 35 to 65% of our muscle fibers are only working. So imagine what we can do if we just stimulate, because our body's like, oh, we're lazy, we're sitting on the couch, Netflix and chill for 3 hours. It starts unplugging things. So those motor control exercises, like the little planks and the tiny little baby exercises, that's completely separate from your power and strength. Those are my recovery days. I always say that's my recovery workout, because it is a workout. You'll sweat more than that than you will lifting weights. I have pro UFC guys in here. They're like, I'm sweating. I'm like, I know. He's like, I wasn't even lifting weights. I'm like, I know. He's like, why is that so hard? Because it's stimulating a different part of your brain and it's a different muscle fiber. So now instead of using, 30% of your muscle fibers, say you're using 60, you're more efficient against gravity. And then you're not going to get spasms. You're not going to lock down because your body's not responding to forces it can't handle because it can handle more and more efficiently transferring loads. So it's really cool to see you can like make someone excel beyond like what you ever thought.
I love it. You said it very similar to how I say it. There's this thing called an arthrokinetic reflex where when the joint is centrated or balanced in its right spot, the autonomic nervous system is lit up and going, this is good. Okay, there's less strain on our system. We can upload a little bit more force production in the muscle. But when that joint gets out of alignment or the body gets a little torqued and tweaked, when there's restriction or limitations, that ANS, that autonomic nervous system, starts to put a governing wire lower and lower to prevent us from getting hurt. And so then, you ask your person, you put them in such a position where it did bring them back to balance and their strength levels immediately increase, whether you're using like a hand dynamometer, and you're going, so we're doing strength training with the muscles you already have. We're not spending 4 to 6 weeks on a hypertrophy phase. We're actually harnessing more potential in you right now that wasn't being allowed before. So I think, honestly, Jena, I think that's missing. I think that is a huge, huge component missing in the world of strength conditioning today, where we still just keep on thinking we've got to go hypertrophy, we got to go power, we got to peak power, basic strength, off season, and so on. But no one's really considering central nervous system, peripheral nervous system, autonomic nervous system, because that is the governing body. I mean, do you just want to like, you can tell how I just want to scream from the rooftops.
Yes. That makes me so happy though, hearing you say that. I'm like, yes, because it's like, that's where I say don't get caught up in fads. And that's where I had one of the other panelists on my Perform Better talk. She was like, sometimes I just let them do what they want. And well, because they're having a bad day. And I'm like, no, we need to educate people. Like you are not doing what you want. These freaking athletes, or celebrities out here that this is what I normally do. I don't give a shit. You're hurt. Like, that's why I'm here. Like, I don't know what you want me to say. I don't care if you're a celebrity. I need to show you what I'm trying to teach you. So it's like telling them, hey, listen, you need to step back for a second. You can't deadlift 400 pounds today. I'll make you stronger by having you lift 1.5 pounds, and you'll literally sweat and not be able to breathe at the same time. I was like, we'll work on that. That's a progression.
I love it. I love it. And I don't want, I'm not here to promote my beliefs or anything, but
no, I love that.
Conversation back and forth.
So happy.
I love the fact.
So refreshing.
Here's the oxymoron is that we're building bodies based on competitive activities like bodybuilding, which was all about how nice can your ass or bicep look, right, on stage and oiled down in a bikini or something. Also powerlifting, like how much just brute force can I lift any way possible? Yeah, there's good ways of doing it and not so good, but it's all really just about force production. And then Olympic lifting, it's like how explosive can I be while I'm standing still? And then we've tried to carry that over into all these sports and athletics, from that being our central hub of which we're trying to create something. But but the problem is that's my problem is that, wait a minute, you're not taking into consideration like a chiropractic philosophy is as we bring the body back into alignment, things function like organ systems function better. Systems of the body are at their optimal level as we bring the body back into alignment. And then the other thing that we've been doing for like 2 million years is walking on 2 feet. And for millions of years, we've been hardwired with a certain efficient joint relationship and sequencing, timing patterns, and so on. Why aren't we building programs that have that as the hub? So everything I look at in my facility is through the lens of what is a person's structural alignment like, and what's missing in terms of their muscular imbalance and joint positioning, and then what is their gait pattern like? Because before they run on a field, they need to walk before they run. So if I can clean up their gait pattern and improve their alignment with the help of these accessory kind of movements, with or without resistance, then I'm building the most efficient athlete I can. And I'm not just throwing bullshit of body, like more weight on them just to make them hypertrophy. So
and that also goes against, you're training your brain the wrong pattern and you're freaking working against yourself. I'm like, we're getting nowhere. Like, what are we doing here? I'm like, I don't go in circles. Like it drives me nuts. And I used to, that's why I was adamant in that Perform Better Summit or talk. I was like, no, I used to just, okay, like let them do it today. And that, no, because you set yourself back, and it's not my philosophy. It's not what we know to be true as far as where we are in science and our clinical experience being in this field. That's a very unknown field. You know, it's really sad that there aren't that many research articles out for like things that help people with longevity, because no one gives about that. They care about pharmaceuticals and these pills and let's sell and business and business. I'm in the business of like making people better, and like I care about human beings. And Joe Gibbs' son, he had two sons, the one, the dip guy, and then the other one, JD. So he was in the NFL too, and he had CTE basically. So it was something where he hired me in NASCAR because he was in NASCAR too, and he's like, I can't walk afterwards and I have pain. And he's like, I want these guys to retire and still be able to live with their families and play with their kids. And I'm like, wow, like this is amazing. You know, I never really I always wanted to work for myself, but I'm like, I'm going to go to that team because that's like a philosophy I want to stand behind. So we won 3 championships with them, and it was amazing. So I was with them for about 4 years. So it was one of the best things I ever did. And then JD started breaking down a little bit, and I took care of him. And we challenged his nervous system. If he was starting to lose his eyesight or his ability to look certain ways, I would get the TV out. We'd play games where he had to look, and I'd be like, you know, it was just to work with the body and the brain on that level. And I used to work with spinal cord injuries in the SNF, and it's like the brain is so crazy as far as the intricacies, and people have no idea. And you can enhance it. So it's like, why not? So this is like, I love this kind of stuff.
Oh, I can't tell you how happy I am to have this conversation.
That's what I said. I'm like,
honestly, it's like a sister from another mother. I mean, we're doing saccades, we're doing near far drills.
Oh my God, I love it.
We're doing just eye tracking. We're also doing vestibular drills, and just that whole motor neurology. It's something that we're slowly seeping into the program because there has to be a buy-in. There has to be an educational process. You can't just tell somebody, hey, when you're doing extension exercise, I want your eyes up because it's going to feed the extensor chain. They'll feel it, but it's more than just that. I mean, it goes over so much. There's something else you said too. It's like when that person comes in, they're having a bad day, just do what you want. No. If we can put them in a better position, and I'm talking structurally, if I can feed them what their body is telling me that it needs, not what their conscious mind is telling it, because that's filled with lies as far as I'm concerned, you know, but the subconscious, where it doesn't have the capacity to lie, if I can tap into that and start to feed it what it really needs, whether we're doing cerebellar kind of inhibition, excitation or activation, we're doing some type of RAPS stuff with them, or we're doing just basic mobility drills or a little bit of balance cueing or some strength. When we're done, they want to go do something else. They want to go out. I feel like I want to go for a swim. Oh, I think I'm going to go for a bike ride. That is success to me.
And you see it. You see it on their face. They like instantly, they look, they leave, and they're like happy, and you could see their neck again, because before they were like this, and they're just like, wow. And because they'll fight me. I have these pro athletes and celebrities fight me. Like, I don't want to do that today. And I used to give in, and I'm sitting here like, you know, doing manual therapy, and I'm like, I hate this, you know, like, and I'm like, it's not that I love doing manual therapy, but I'm like, you don't need this, and I'm giving in to.
It's not your responsibility.
Yes, and it's not going to help you, and I'm doing myself and you a disservice, because this is bullshit. It's not going to help you. Your nervous system needs to take over, and that's what's going to help you, especially on a long-term scale. So it's so crazy. You know all this stuff. I love it.
It really, I mean, I do the same thing you're doing. You got to keep learning, because if you're not, you instantly become a dinosaur, especially in today's world. And I think that, you know, in terms of, I won't say final frontier, but the frontier that hasn't been explored in the field of strength conditioning, and I got to say physical therapy to certain degrees, is motor neurology.
And our medical field. Science. Are you kidding me? Let's throw that in there too. And our medical field.
Yeah. Oh, well, forget about the medical field. I don't know about them. I just, you know, if all they spend is like, I think it's 2 weeks out of entire medical school is about biomechanics. Like, there's something very wrong with that. Yeah. So I've got a few great orthopedists in town here. and we have a wonderful relationship. But there's several more that I can't even go to. You want to, their shoulder is impinged, so you just want to go in there and carve it up and create space. Do you realize the reason why their shoulder is impinged is because their hips are rotated in the opposite direction, and that shoulder's trying to come forward because something has to?
Right. Or they have no activation in their stabilizers, their scapula. I'm like, it just sits, and their pec minors are like me, you know. And I'm like, no one addresses that. No one addresses their feet. No one addresses any of that. And it's like, and then you go into a surgery and you have more atrophy and more breakdown. Then you're taking pills. Then you're a drug addict. I've seen it a million times.
Oh, it's crazy. And then half the time, the surgical intervention isn't something it may deal with the symptom of pain, but it's just kicking the can down the street, and somewhere else it's going to explode onto them. And or maybe they'll just, hey, you know what? That one didn't hold really well. I'd like to do that surgery again. And then, of course, in our culture, doctors know best. A lot of people will just go along with that instead of saying, well, wait a minute, that sounds like the definition of insanity, is doing the same thing over and expecting different results. Yeah. Oh man, Jena, I'm into you, girl. I
love it. I'm like, did we just become best friends? So that's what I do. So people are like, hey, my doctor said, like, this is a reputation I have. My doctor said I need surgery, but I knew I had to call you first. Like, you know what I mean? Because again, it's not a malicious thing. It's an ignorance thing. Like, our medical world, everything's a business. When you don't lead with people as number one, that's when you start to lose sight of what you're actually doing. They follow certain things that insurance will cover. Why? Those things won't help you. Like, if this helps them more than what insurance will cover, I'm not going to do that because I'm not going to get paid. I'd rather not take insurance and then charge what I want to charge. So it's really sad. I tell people all the time, I'm like, I'll do more for you in one session than most therapists can in 6 months to a year. So I guarantee everything I do, because it's hard to tell people this because they're hearing it from 7 specialists and this and that. And so I just say money back guarantee. Like, just, I don't want to. So that's how I do it.
So what are some of your go-to assessment tools? I'm kind of curious. How do you break it down and find hunt down the clues and get to the root cause of what's going on?
So I'm always, I love SFMA, and I love going deep into it. So bringing the nervous system in with coordination and strength things, strength deficits, mobility deficits, but also my big assessment that I correlate with everything and that I teach them to integrate into their lives is their habits. What is your joint position on a regular basis? Do you sit in hip flexion for 6 hours? I'm like, if you timed how much you were in hip flexion, how many hours are you working against me? Because what we're doing in here, I don't care if you understand it, unless you realize that, like, the other 75% of the day you're working against what we're doing here. This 1 hour I see you a week or whatever it is not going to do anything, especially on a long-term scale. So we start changing those things, and they're like, wow, I get off the airplane and I don't, you know, I'm like, I say tummy time for adults. I'm like, lay on your damn stomach, you know, like, prop some pillows, tummy time for adults, like, get yourself in some extension, like, get out of hip flexion. And I teach people how to integrate this stuff into their lives instead of like always standing desk. I'm like, you can't even operate sitting. I'm like, you're going to stand now for hours at a time. I'm like, let's not do that. Let's not do that. So yeah, I think they're relating their habits with my assessment.
Yeah, I look at everyone that comes in here as a wheelchair athlete. And I don't mean that in a sarcastic manner, but in our culture, people are living in wheelchairs.
Kids are worse. Kids have worse overuse parents or injuries than their parents. I'm like, so you have a calcification on your Achilles tendon. You're like 8 years old. I was like, your dad's calcification is smaller than that, and he's 65. I'm so like, and I tell people, like, you would love this. I always say slopping in your bones. We all slop in our bones all day long. I'm like, and it's not to say anything negative against anyone, but we're sloppy, just flatline, you're just completely dead weight. 3 days in a coma was equivalent to 30 years of aging as far as atrophy and coordination reduction. Like, how 3 days? So imagine, like, I know we're, you know, when we Netflix and chill or whatever, we're not, you know, it's not completely dead weight for hours, but still it's a significant amount of time, especially if you're watching like a marathon of shows. So I just feel like our culture is, I don't know, it's going in the wrong direction, and we need to educate people to be better with this.
Yeah, I mean, you want to geek out on research too. You should look at NASA's sleep study program that started back in the late 50s when the space race began. And they were getting paid volunteers to lay down in hospital beds that were elevated slightly at their feet to kind of balance out the fluid that they would try and, mimic in microgravity. They found out hemodynamics, orthostatic tolerance, metabolism, digestion, a whole bunch of other things diminished. And these were studies that were done over 30 to 45 days or maybe up to 90 days. Yep. And they found all of these like major reductions in the first 8 hours of the initial study. Like these people that was like the average work day. See? So can you imagine? Okay, so, granted, you're not laying in a bed most of the time.
I'm wearing compression socks right now. And I look up the research because I work with a company called CEP, and like
I got their socks.
Nice, see, because you would have their socks because research. So they're the only ones that measure circumference. Everyone, I'm like 2x2, it's bullshit. I'm like, yeah, they now know 20 to 30 millimeters of mercury is like the most researched benefit as far as the pressure on your legs, but they don't do circumference measurements. I'm like, so 20 to 30 millimeters of mercury in one size for me is different than for you, So like I tell people all the time, I've looked up so much research on this. It gives you 30% more oxygen to your tissues before, during, and after exercise. Like 30%.
That's why I'm really big on the foot. 26 bones, 33 joints that should all move in one direction.
When I dissected the foot, I was like, what? How many layers are in it? It's unbelievable how much stuff is in the foot.
And then how about this? The calf muscle, it's very heart-shaped, would you say? And not to say that that's the reason, but I look at the calf as the heart of the lower leg. You want to talk about circulation? Well, there is the biggest muscle that's going to be a pumping mechanism for the lower extremities. Well, how do you get that to fully function? Well, you need a fully functioning ankle and foot complex to do that. But if you're going to be high rigid arch or overpronated or everted flattened foot, you're not going to be able to get that pumping mechanism the way it was designed. So it's no wonder that anybody with ankle issues, whether they have a history of inversion sprains or talus fractures or anything else, are probably going to have some edema in their lower extremity. So you start getting that foot and ankle to work better. We use some foot wedges here and some good placement to get those points of contact to really hit. Yep. And then suddenly that swelling starts to disappear. And those compression socks, which are very helpful, are going to be something that you're going to intermittently use when you know that you're going to reduce activity. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, it's ridiculous. It's like, I don't know. It's really sad to see how little we try to control our daily lives when it's so simple. These little things that you can implement daily that aren't that big of a deal can change the way you can focus, your productivity in your day, like your productivity at work, your relationships, because you're not miserable. I literally see, especially when people are neck breathers, like they're miserable because their body, like you're basically kinking all your hoses, just like everything else we were talking about. When everything's spasming down because the mechanics in your joint position isn't correct, your hoses are being kinked because your body's freaking out because it's trying to protect you. So I'm like, you kink these hoses that are trying to get blood flow and nerve signal up and down, and you're just reducing your efficiency and you're reducing the body's ability to do anything,
I do. That's the beautiful thing about the body is that all you need is a way in. Yep. Right. And you start exploring it, and then it'll take you down the rabbit hole to where you really need to be. For one person, it is the fractured wrist that they had when they were 12 years old. For another person, it may be something going on with their foot. And like you say, maybe it's another person like my wife who is asthmatic, who forever would try and exhale by pressing her body down instead of the diaphragm coming up. And she wonders why, well, not anymore, about why her neck would always be driving her nuts. What? Oh.
And they think, oh, I need to stand up straight. Let me pull my shoulders down. Everyone's like, why does my neck hurt? Why does my neck hurt? I'm like, stop forcing it. I'm like, first of all, your hips are so tight. Like you're here with your head forward posture. I was like, let's loosen up your damn hips so you could actually move, So it's just making them aware of it, because then there's that shame part of it where they're like, oh, I failed again, or because they don't, it's just failure after failure because they're not working as a system trying to better the root cause of the problem. They're just running in circles again.
Create a little change in one pattern and you create change amongst the entire thing. So whether it's just getting her, in my wife's case, just to see if she can tap into getting a connection with her diaphragm and actually breathing in a different way, which was so difficult. But as soon as she started tapping into it, her neck started feeling better,
And see, I'm a poker. and a tactile person.
Heck
So
yeah.
I was like, why do you do that? Like, it's so annoying. And I was like, I'm training your brain. Shut up. Like, and it's like,
Gotta make a connection.
He's like, you always poke me. He's like, why do you poke? Like, he got so mad. And he's like, what if I, and he like came at me. I'm like, no, don't poke me. I'm like, I'm training your brain. And then he's like, wait, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm training your brain. Like, I'm teaching your brain. I'm like poking at it so your nerve signal comes. He's like, oh, really? And like, he's like, he loves that kind of stuff. But it's so funny because otherwise they're like, what are you doing? Because most people are like, what the hell are you doing? And I'll put my hands on, because it is hard. And they give the deer in headlight look like I am doing that. And you're like, no, you're not. Because their perception in their mind, their proprioception is off. Their body thinks they're doing it, but it's definitely not doing it.
A little rub and scrub, a little hubble.
Awareness.
Yeah.
What'd you say?
I said a little rub and scrub. That's what we call it.
Right?
I'm just gonna rub this area, scrub it down. I might give
Yes.
a little cuddle, you know.
Yes.
Maybe this area just needs a
And
little
instantly
rubbing.
your brain's like, oh, I remember that place.
Yeah. Yeah, training the dark zones. That's the other thing we
Yep.
throw out there. There's places in your body that you just don't have good connections to. They're dark areas. So how are
Yes.
you expecting them to move?
And you see it all day
exactly
long. I can't help it. You just walk. And you're like, that person's gonna have back pain when they're older. That person, you know, like it's so sad. Even in these professional athletes with these coaches that have egos, where I'm like, this guy's deficient. You know, he's not throwing through his hip. He's throwing, like, I work with a lot of professional boxers, and I'm like, he's not throwing through his core and his hip. He's throwing with his arm, and then he comes to me for impingement and bursitis. I was like, yeah, no shit. Like let's fix the actual problem, not just like, let's put some kinesio tape on it and, you know, go ahead. Cause the coach like can't handle the fact that there's something going on. I can't do that. So I touch on a lot of egos in LA, but I want to challenge coaches to be better. So I don't care that I don't get along with everyone. I just want people to know what they're doing and why they're doing it, you know?
LA and egos, I had no idea they were there.
Yeah, that doesn't exist ever.
Oh, Jena, I could just.
I know. I'm
honestly,
like, when
I
are you
could keep
coming
on
out
going.
here?
Give us a topic and we'll run with it. But this has been fun. I don't want to take more of your time. We've been going for a while here, and I look forward to your next Perform Better presentation, whenever that is in 2022. I'll be there. Are you down in Long Beach at the conference center, or where have you presented?
Yeah, so I spoke in Long Beach, and then there it's random based on schedule which ones you speak at. So we'll see. Hopefully those start all opening up, and I'll speak for more of them. And I was speaking for Perform Better Brazil too. So it's always fun to, especially with our level of understanding. It's like a lot of people know what we know, but they don't know how to correlate it all together. And so it's fun to bring your knowledge to people, and then you see other people helping people get better. And like, there's so much to go around. So I don't know. I hope to speak at more, and I hope you speak at some stuff too, because that would be amazing. And I'm starting my podcast too. As soon as I'm like, if you saw like the lights and everything, we're still installing.
That's
so this
good.
is the podcast area, and so we still have a little bit more to go. It's called House of Pain LA. So it's either, you know, I hurt your ego or I physically hurt you. Because sometimes when you reset the nervous system, your nervous system is so hypersensitive that it hurts when I do my manual therapy. And that's where I get my therapy.
Okay, so moving into the future, you're in Santa Monica. If people want to find out more about Dr.
Yep.
Jena Gatses, how are we going to do that?
So either drjena.com. I have a lot of stuff where I put up education, and I'm really releasing my brand this year. I have a bunch of products coming out, and just little things that you can do in your life. Like, here, this is my elbow in your pocket. Like, you don't need me today. Like, go do this on your own. So there's a lot coming out as far as courses and other speaking events too. So, and if you're ever in town, let me know. I'd love to interview you too once we get everything going. And then even continuing ed stuff. Let's do this. I feel like there's not a lot of people out there like you. So it was refreshing to talk to you.
Definitely. Yeah, I'll take you up on anything like that. That's great.
Love it.
Well, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Man, I could have kept on going with Jena, but we'll save that for another episode, perhaps. We'll call this Volume 1. So be on the lookout and somewhere down the road for Volume 2. And when she gets her podcast set up, I'll let you know when we have our little tete-a-tete on her show. But in the meantime, keep listening to Zealous, tell some friends, subscribe, and we'll see you next week.